Hello, welcome to another episode of GenServer. In today's episode, I want us to stop our GenServer process from running. The GenServer process are known to be a long-running process, and that means they will stay alive as long as the application is up and running. However, there are circumstances that can lead to an exit of a GenServer process. Let's say, for example, something goes wrong within the application, and this error that is happening within the application causes a total shutdown of the application. That will be one of the external events that will force the GenServer process to exit. Another factor can be if you explicitly tell the GenServer to exit, and that is what we'll be working with in this episode. The other thing is if an error is raised within the process, it will cause the GenServer process to also exit. So in this episode, we are going to focus on the second point that I've mentioned, which is explicitly shutting down the GenServer process. There are different ways in which you can shut down a GenServer process. The first example, which I'm going to start with, is by using the GenServer stop function. The other way in which you can stop the GenServer from running is by returning an atom stop tuple within the handle callback. So let's start with the first example, which is the GenServer stop. Open your interactive shell using the ix-s mix command. Start by starting the GenServer process. Pattern match and OK PID because we'll be in need of the PID. I'm calling GenServer start. I'll pass it the server module name. That is the message server. And the second argument, I'll pass it as an empty list. The process has been initialized successfully, and you can see we have an OK PID. Next, we are going to call the GenServer stop function, which takes in a PID, the request, and the timeout. The request defaults to normal, and the timeout also defaults to an atom infinity. So now we can call the GenServer stop using the PID and let the second argument default to normal. Immediately I've called GenServer stop function, you will notice that it's no longer listening to the retry request, and that is because our process is no longer alive. We can verify that using the process.alive function. And this is how we stop the GenServer. This is one of the ways of stopping the GenServer process from running. Whenever the GenServer process is responsible for its exit, it will invoke the terminate callback function before it exits. So this is the terminate callback, and it takes in two arguments, the reason and the state. These are the same reason that we can pass in the GenServer stop function whenever we want to stop the process. It can be an atom normal, an atom shutdown, or a tuple of an atom shutdown and a term. The terminate callback is important when you want to perform an important cleanup. Let's say in a business logic, you'd like to persist the current state before the process exits, or you'd like to log the current state and the reason for terminating before that process exits. This is where the terminate callback can come in handy. Let's go ahead and add it to our server. We have the terminate callback function, and we are told that it takes in two arguments, that is the reason and the state. So this reason and the same reason that matches which matches the reason that we pass in the GenServer stop. So in our logic, we just want to perform a simple task within the terminate, and that is printing the message informing us that it's about to terminate with this reason. So I'll just use the IO ports and write process terminating with reason. The reason can be an atom, can be a tuple. We'll call inspect first, then pass reason. So this is what the inspect function does. Let's say we have a list. If we inspect this list, it returns it in a string format. So it's easier for us to interpolate this format instead of interpolating the list itself, because if we try to interpolate the list within a string, it will raise an error. Let's say we want to interpolate a string. This, if we pass the list as it is, instead of a list, let me try a tuple. So you can see we are getting an error if we do that. But if we inspect this tuple, we get the tuple as it is. So we have defined the terminate callback, and we are told that it returns any term. We don't have to worry about the return type. So we are going to leave it that way as it is. Let's recompile our new changes. And state, it's not the state is not used. I'll add an underscore. Recompile it again. Now we are good to go. The process is not alive. I'm going to start the GenServer process again. Then let's call the stop function. Let's stop the server from running. You can see process terminated with reason and atom normal. We can play around with the reason that can be passed within the stop function. That will mean starting our GenServer process, and so the default is normal. Let's use the other reason, like shutdown. Process termination with reason shutdown. That is one way of us stopping the GenServer process. The other way that I'd mentioned is by returning the atom stop tuple within the callback. If we decide to use the atom stop tuple within the callback, it's important to note that the terminate callback can only be invoked if we use the atom stop tuple within other callback except for the init callback. I want to introduce the stop tuple within the handle info callback. The reason why I want to introduce it within the handle info callback is because I want to assume we are starting a GenServer process for each message that we are sending to the given phone number. Therefore, the logic that I want is after sending this message, that means the task will be completed. I want us to stop the GenServer from running. This kind of logic is important in scenarios whereby, let's say in your application, you are starting a GenServer process for each task that you are performing. This GenServer process will occupy a space in the memory. The more process you're going to start, that will mean more memory consumption. And it is advisable if a task is completed, there's no need of the GenServer process idling there doing nothing. It is important that you shut down that process. And this will save you from consuming a lot of memory within your application. So that is the logic that I'm going to assume here. It's kind of shady refactor that I'm going to do, but we are working with an assumption to demonstrate how you can shut down your GenServer using the atoll stop tuple. Let's go ahead and refactor our logic. So the logic is being added within the handle info. This is what I want. If the request is successful, that means that message will be sent and it will mean that the task is completed. We stop the GenServer process from running. If the request fails and we exhaust the maximum retries, that means that the task will be completed and we need to also stop the GenServer process from running. We're going to perform two checks for the status. If the status is sent and if the retries equals to the max retries. Let's go ahead and add that. Since we are working with one phone number at a time, our state contains the phone number's placeholder, which is a list. And in here, I want to pattern match the phone number. By pattern matching, that will be equals to state dot phone numbers. So this is a list I'm pattern matching. I'm interested with the head because it will be one item. The tail here will be an empty list. Since this will be one item, instead of just passing the phone number, I can pattern match the map. I'm interested with the status within that placeholder. And I'm also interested with the retries. Status because I'm checking if the status is sent. The retries is because I'm checking if the retries equals to the max retries. Let's add the conditional statement. If status equals to sent, or I'm using or because it's either the status or the retries, or the retries equals to state dot max retries. If so, we need to return the stop atom. Let's go to the handle info and confirm how so this is the handle info. It can return a tuple of an atom stop. The reason can be any term and the new state. Okay, that is what we're going to do. Return stop. Reason can be any term. Let's say normal. And the state as it is. We are not updating the state. Else, it's supposed to perform the retry. So I'll just go ahead and add this end in here and format that. The other thing to note is when we start our GenServer process, the initial state of the phone numbers placeholder will be an empty list. Therefore, we cannot pattern match an empty list this way because there will be no head and a tail, and this section will fail. To refactor that further, let's add another handle info. It will take the same request retry. What we want to do is pattern matching the state. I'm interested with the phone numbers placeholder. And pattern matching with an empty list. If it's an empty list, it's going to send the request message after 5 seconds and return no reply state. Let's go through the refactor and understand how it works. Once we start our GenServer process, if the phone numbers placeholder is an empty list, just send the request retry again and return no reply state. Otherwise, if there's something within the phone numbers placeholder, we shall pattern match to retrieve the phone number because we assuming that we are working with one phone number at a time. Then we get the current state, we get the status, we check if the status is sent or if the retries equals to the max retries. If so, stop the GenServer process from running. Else, let it retry sending the message. Okay, we can run this and see if it's working. The first thing we have to do is recompile the changes. Then let's start our GenServer process. We have started the GenServer process, and the first thing I want to do is send a request to the GenServer to send a message to the given phone number. That means I'm going to use the GenServer cast. Pass it the PID and the request message. So that will be send message, can be any number. Okay, we have sent a request. You can see it's sending message to that. It has sent message to that phone number. It has listened to the retry request. After that, the process has terminated after completing sending the message. Now let's try with a phone number that results to an error. So for this phone number, the default max retries is 5. After the 5th request, we expect the GenServer process to be terminated. Let's check the current process. By checking the current process, we do PID. No. So remember that our process terminated. I was expecting it to print listening to retry request, but now that I've not seen it, our GenServer already terminated. So let's start our GenServer process again, then try to send a request. So I want to get the current state. So we have already reached the max retry. So the number of retries already made is 5. And after the 5th request, you can see listening to retry request and process termination with reason normal. new logic that we've added, it's working as expected. So this way we have taken advantage of the terminate callback to print us a message to inform us that the message is terminated with a given reason before that process exits. Another important thing worth mentioning while working with the terminate callback, it's not a guarantee for it to be called whenever a GenServer process exits. For example, when a GenServer process exits due to an external event, maybe there is something going wrong within other parts of the application that caused a total shutdown of the application, which will definitely cause the GenServer process to exit, is not a guarantee for the terminate callback to be called. So if you're relying on the terminate callback, it's important to note, and this has been mentioned in the GenServer docs. I'm going to read this. Therefore, important cleanup should be done using process link or monitor. And this is a situation whereby the GenServer exits due to external events because it's not responsible for its exit. So if the GenServer process was responsible for its exit, it's a guarantee that the terminate callback will be called. But if not, it's important to use the process link or the monitors. That's it for this episode. We have looked on how we can stop the GenServer process from running, and we have used the GenServer stop function to stop the process and also return an atom stop tuple within the handle info callback. We have also looked at the terminate callback, how it works, and in what scenarios that we can expect it to be called. So the terminate callback, as mentioned, it's important for performing an important cleanup if you want to, and this can be something like persisting the current state or even logging the current state and the reason in which the process has exited.